Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we've got a nice big 9-game Major League Baseball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? I'm also going to note we have a couple games in some pretty crazy places. We have the Dodgers in Colorado, so that should be a very interesting game. With that said, I do think the slate is pretty interesting. I think it'll be a pretty high-scoring slate. We have some pitching that's interesting, but it's not the best pitcher slate that I've seen in a while. So I think it's going to be hard to because the pitchers are fairly expensive today. So let's go ahead and look at those. So we'll start here with our top overall plays. One will be Skeens for Pittsburgh against Cincinnati. Now Skeens has been good in the last three games, but he's also been good in 4 of the 6 so far this season. He's got a good K rate, and he's got a plus matchup here. He's got one of the better matchups of the top 5 pitchers. He's also going to be one of the lower. He's going to be high owned, but he's going to be lower than the top few guys. So I think he's a really good play on the slate, especially to be somewhat contrarian as well. Max Fried for Atlanta also has a positive matchup here against Detroit. Now, Detroit's been okay this season. He's got a high ceiling, though, and he has a low floor. He's been over 30 fantasy points, or very close to 30 fantasy points in 4 of the past 6 games. The other two, he was under 5 fantasy points, so that's a very extreme thing there. But his strikeout stuff has been solid for the most part. He's had a couple rough games that way, but I think he's going to have some good opportunity here to have a big game, and he's got a lot of upside. He's got a higher ceiling than anybody else on the slate, so that gives him some potential. Some other GPP plays, Sonny Gray, he's the most expensive option on the slate. He's got a good matchup, but his ceiling is lower than I'd like for a guy that's over $10,000. But he is a GPP play on the slate, so he's definitely worth a look. Kikuchi is in play for Toronto. I do think that he's an interesting play today against Boston, though I do think that his ceiling is a little bit lower than we'd like, and his K rate is very similar to Gray's and Pavetta's, so he's going to fit in the position where the fact that he's $2,000 cheaper than Gray does give him a little bit of upside here, but he's still a little bit risky on the slate. And then Pavetta for Boston, he is facing Toronto. Now, both these guys on this game have some positives, and both of them have some negatives. And 9 starts though for Pavetta, he's had 3 bad games, and that has happened every 3 games for some reason. So if that was to hold still, then this means a good game's coming. So that's pretty much the only reason that I would utilize him here, as he's going to be the one of the lower owned expensive options on the slate, but he does have a decent K rate, so he's definitely worth a look. I have 2 boomer bust plays for you that are cheap. Soriano from the Angels against Milwaukee. Now, he's a very extreme play, as he has a good ceiling, but he has a very low floor in this matchup. And I do think Milwaukee is a team that's very favorable today, so he's definitely tough to roster. And then Paxton for the Dodgers. He's going to have some usage today because even though this game's in Colorado, Colorado's still not a great team. So he's going to have some potential, as he also has a boomer bust ability here on the slate. If we're going to rank the pitchers based on their ownership, the top 5 guys are Gray, Kikuchi, Fried, Pavetta, and Skeens. All of these guys are probably going to be over 25% owned today. The other 3 that have a little bit that are over 5% but under 10% ownership are going to be Gray for the Texas Rangers, Soriano for the Angels, and Paxton for the Dodgers. Now, the rest of the pitchers are going to be really limited probably in their usage. So if you see some situation that you like, then definitely utilize them. We do have one pitcher that really hasn't done much yet this season, and that's Carlos Rodriguez. There'll be a second start. And he didn't do particularly great against Toronto. I mean, he didn't do terrible. He just didn't get many strikeouts. So he could be like a Hail Mary play, even though he's in a somewhat of a difficult matchup here. I mean, it's not that difficult. The Angels are not that good, but his K rate's pretty low, so he could be a sneaky Hail Mary kind of play on this one. Let's go ahead and get into our bats now. So for catcher, our top overall play, and going to be somebody I really like a lot today, is Patrick Bailey for San Francisco. He's got really good metrics today, and he draws good upside in this matchup, so he's definitely worth a look here. He's also going to be fairly well owned because of his price point, but he's definitely somebody that's worth a look. Campasuno for San Diego is a good one-off. At $3,300. He's a kind of a good one-off today for San Diego. I don't love him, but I don't hate him, and so he's definitely worth a look. But Bailey is definitely the best option by a lot. Francisco Alvarez also projects pretty well today. I can't find anybody. Hang on, Alvarez for the Mets. Now, I do think the Mets have a tough matchup against Texas, but I think that they have some favorability met upside today. He hasn't been good this season, but he definitely draws good upside metrics here. And then Jansen for Toronto. If you don't use Pavetta, then and you can pay up at this position, then he'd be probably my favorite pay up play at this on this one here. The top owned guys for this position will be Gary Sanchez, Will Smith, Logan Hope, and Patrick Bailey. So Patrick Bailey is definitely my favorite of the more expensive options as far as chalky players. Low owned upside guys would be Danny Jansen, Connor Wong for Boston, and Sean Murphy for Atlanta. Let's look at our first baseman here. So Otani is extremely expensive today, $7,000. He will be in Colorado, so that definitely gives him a lot of upside here, but he's definitely super expensive and going to be hard to roster as a result. Freddie Freeman also in the same situation, also super expensive. Bryce Harper also in a good spot here for Philly against San Diego, and he's also fairly expensive today, so he's going to be hard to roster as well. But a cheap option here will be not Bellinger. Bellinger's also a top overall play on the slate, but Goldschmidt is actually going to be my favorite play at this position. He's also somebody I think is a core play, as he has absolutely fantastic metrics for this position, and he's really one of the few guys that are sub $4,000 price that has any upside at this position as well. I mean, there's a couple other guys, but I think he is probably the top overall option, and he just looks solid. He's been hitting the ball pretty decent the last week or so. So I think if he can get a home run or something, he can definitely pay off here. And he's nice and cheap, so that's nice. The top owned players at this position will be Otani, Paul Goldschmidt, Freddie Freeman, and then Donovan Solano probably. And then for the low ownership guys, Bobby Dahlbeck, who's kind of a dirt cheap play for Boston at $2,300, and Rice Hoskins from Milwaukee. So I think that we have some pretty good options at that position, but I like Goldschmidt quite a bit, especially as a cash game or as a core chalky kind of player. Looking at second base, this position is very limited today, but Marcus Semien does jump off the page as the top overall play for Texas. Texas has struggled some lately, but he's been pretty decent, getting at least hits and things and having random big boost games. But he does need to have a solid game to pay off at this position, but he is not too, his metrics are just far and away the best at this position overall. Nico Horner is kind of a good one-off for the Cubs in this matchup. He doesn't have a lot of home run upside, but he does have good hitting metrics today, so he's definitely worth a look. And then Dario Estrada, he's kind of a one-off for San Francisco as well, similar to Horner, but he does have a little bit better home run upside. But again, neither of these guys have great metrics on the slate. The top overall players owned today will probably be Marcus Semien, and then also Brett Wisely for San Francisco. One of the reasons Wisely will be somewhat popular is because he can play multiple positions and he's dirt cheap for San Francisco, and San Francisco looks pretty decent today. Some low-owned upside guys: David Schneider for Toronto, Nolan Gorman for St. Louis, and Jamie Westbrook for Boston. Also, Bryce Terang for Milwaukee is kind of a contrarian play. Looking at our third baseman, a top overall play today will be Chris Morel for the Cubs here. He looks pretty solid today. He has been boom or bust, and he's really struggled the last few games, but the matchup metrics here are really good. I also think Manny Machado lines up well today, despite the fact that he has not really done much the last few games, but he does have some nice upside today. So a cheap option that really can help you on the slate is going to be Ezekiel Duran for Texas, as he's just dirt cheap and he has good metrics today. And occasionally he'll have a game where he looks like he's really solid and has a solid game. So, and that's just the situation he's in today. Austin Riley also looks okay for Atlanta, as well does Matt Chapman, who might be with the sneakiest play at this position, though he's a little bit more expensive than I'd like. I do think he's going to be pretty popular, even more popular than what he looks like in general. So this position is relatively deep. Some top owned guys: Kevin Biggio for the Dodgers could be a sneaky play if he gets in the lineup today. Ezekiel Duran will be popular. Joey Ortiz from Milwaukee will also be popular, as will Davis Wenzel. I think a lot of people will try to utilize this position to be cheap, and that's definitely a good strategy on the slate. But some low owned upside guys: Rafael Devers, Nolan Arenado, Addison Barger for Toronto, and then Austin Riley as well. So Looking at our shortstops, we're going to see a little bit of overlap. Some other guys we've already mentioned here, but O'Neal Cruz looks absolutely phenomenal today for Pittsburgh. He's also a guy that I think is pretty close to being a core plate or a core play. He's been hitting the ball pretty well, and he has good metrics here again, so he's definitely worth a look. Um, Other options at shortstop, Ella De La Cruz. His metrics are off the charts today, despite being a somewhat tough matchup here. He has been pretty good lately, but he struggles a little bit more on the road than at home, so if you keep that in mind. He's also fairly expensive and going to be super hard to roster today. Lindor for the Mets also looks very interesting. He's been really solid lately, and I really like his upside here. He's been absolutely phenomenal, and he's got home run upside, but his price keeps rising. Trey Turner also in play today. If he ends up in the starting lineup today, he'll be somebody I would consider. And then Tovar for Colorado. He's a little bit expensive, but he's kind of contrarian play. And then same with Hakem. He definitely draws decent metrics today for San Diego. Some top ownership options at this position. Ezekiel Duran, who I mentioned. Brett Wisely can also play here. Mason Wynn for St. Louis, and then Francisco Lindor is probably going to be the best of the most expensive options outside of O'Neal Cruz. Looking at some kind of low ownership upside guys, Willie Adames, O'Neal Cruz, Refala for Boston, and Corey Seager. Now, O'Neal Cruz, I do think he's not chalky, but he's definitely my favorite when it comes to metrics today. So he looks good, and he can be very contrarian today as well. Looking at outfielders, man, there's just a lot here. So I'm going to move this over here so we can look at it this way. Let's see here. So our top overall plays are going to be Otani, Tatis Jr., Bellinger, Schwarber, Michael Conforto, and Yaz for San Francisco as well. I really think Conforto and Yaz are going to be kind of sneaky plays today. Looking at some other guys, Ian Happ, Toscar Hernandez, Sia Suzuki, Brennan Nemo, and Jorge Soler. I think these are secondary options from the top overall guys. If you can't, it's gonna be hard to roster a bunch of guys from the Dodgers today because pitching's just not that cheap. But I think you can definitely get some of these mid-price guys in here. Yelich, Tauchman, Pages, O'Neill, Fraley, and Hunter Goodman all look decent today. And these are kind of my kind of one-off Hail Mary guys. Chisholm Jr., Brian Reynolds, Brendan Marsh, Robbie Grossman, Jack Sawinski, and Will Benson all have good metrics. They won't be as good as the top three sets here, but they're still pretty solid today. The top ownership guys at this position, Kevin Biggio for the Dodgers, he's definitely going to be sneaky today. If he'd probably be high used because his price point, but sneaky today because he has some upside there. Otani, Andy Pages for the Dodgers, Toscar Hernandez, and then Jared Kalenic. Kalenic is kind of interesting because he is going to be cheap. His metrics are okay today. They're not top overall, but they're still decent for this matchup. For other top ownerships, Tatis Jr., Dylan Carlson, Robbie Grossman, Brian Reynolds, and McCutcheon. These are good. These guys are going to be popular to use because of the price points and things like that. Low-owned upside guys, Bobby Dahlbeck, who we already mentioned, Tyler O'Neill, David Schneider, Addison Barger for Toronto, and CDA Rafaela. And a couple other guys, Christian Yelich, Dallas Garcia, Rob Snyder, and Alec Burleson. I think that you're gonna have to utilize some of the more like guys like Conforto and Yaz, and then maybe Ian Happ or Nemo or somebody from the Dodgers like Pages, or even Kevin Biggio, because I don't think these low-owned upside guys are really all that great on this particular slate. Let's look at our stacks here. Now, we do have some sub 3,000 players that we should mention today just to keep that here. Robbie Grossman, Dylan Carlson, Rowdy Talese, Ezekiel Duran, Bobby Dahlbeck, Brett Wisely, and Pete Crow Armstrong all have decent metrics today, and they're definitely worth a look. This would be 3,000. So they're definitely guys that we should consider. So let's look at our stacks. For the Dodgers, super expensive stack with Otani, Toscar Hernandez, Freddie Freeman, Pages, and Smith. Now, obviously, there's a couple other guys you could utilize from the team if Biggio gets in here in the lineup, then he'd be somebody I would consider as well, just for matchup purposes. Looking at Philly and Colorado, I think that both these teams have a lot of upside, but Colorado is a risky play today. There's really only two players I like a lot, McMahon and Stallings, but the other guys are kind of hit or miss. For Philly, Harper, Dahl, Schwarber, Bohm, and Marsh all look really solid today, and that's a very stable stack, I think, on the slate. For the next four teams, Chicago Cubs, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, and San Francisco, They all look pretty decent. None of them are really 5 team stacks, but they have, 3, 4, or 5 guys, and I think all of these teams are very stackable on this one. Looking at Texas through New York Mets, I think these teams are going to have some upside today, but they also have some struggle risk, and so I think these are contrarian stacks that you can utilize. Most of them don't have full 5 team stacks, but they're definitely decent. And then the bottom 5 teams, Toronto, Boston, Miami, Cincinnati, and Detroit, these teams likely will struggle here. However, the stacks don't look terrible. Even though they got tough matchup metrics in these ones, they don't look as awful as I thought that they would. I really do think that this Toronto stack is interesting today, and so is the Boston stack. But it's definitely they're definitely risky. These are definitely contrarian, and you're definitely gonna have to do one-offs there when it comes to GPP type stacks. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.